The first time I saw the missed calls, the number on the screen didn't even feel real. 28. All from the same people who had brushed me off just hours earlier. My hands trembled as the monitor beside my hospital bed beeped steadily, the sterile air heavy with disinfectant. Tubes snaked into my arm, a blood pressure cuff squeezed my bicep in measured intervals, and the fluorescent ceiling lights blurred under the tears I refused to let fall. I stared at that glowing rectangle, the group chat still open with its cold indifference. My brother's two-line dismissal, my parents' clipped excuse about a barbecue, and then my quiet reply, fine. Now they wanted to talk, now that the story had spread further than our family thread. But at that moment, I rolled the phone over on my chest and closed my eyes. I had no energy left to give them. 30 hours earlier, the story had begun in a far less dramatic place baggage claim at Portland International Airport. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee from a nearby kiosk and the sharp tang of jet fuel that always clings to an airport. My body was already running on fumes, two connections turbulence that kept the flight attendants strapped in and a dull ache from the phantom limb where my left arm had once been. The harness of my new prosthetic bit into my shoulder, the skin rubbed raw beneath the stiff strap. When the conveyor belt lurched into motion, I positioned myself awkwardly, bracing with my right hand. Suitcases tumbled out sliding along the black rubber. I spotted mine oversized black with a bright yellow tag. It was James, one of my unit's jokes, who once called it the taxi cab. Only now dragging it off the belt felt like wrestling an alligator with one arm. I gritted my teeth and leaned back with all my weight until the suitcase thudded onto the floor beside me. Sweat dampened the collar of my shirt despite the chilly blast of overworked air conditioning. I paused, caught my breath, then pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the family group chat, the same thread where birthday greetings were often replaced by quick emojis, and my updates from Afghanistan were usually left unread. Me flight lands at 5:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up? The typing dots popped up, then disappeared. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated. Troy busy. Just grab an Uber. Another buzz. Mom. We've got a BBQ tonight. Why didn't you plan better? I stared at the words until they blurred. For months overseas, I'd rehearsed the homecoming, maybe a hug in the arrivals hall, maybe Dad awkwardly holding a welcome home sign. I had not pictured this a rideshare app and a shrug of inconvenience. I typed back 2 words, fine, and with that, something in me folded inward. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just bent myself smaller like I had been doing since I was a girl. The Uber queue outside was long, a snaking line of travelers pulling wheeled suitcases behind them. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glare across the glass facade, and I blinked against the brightness. My body swayed slightly, legs unsteady after so many cramped hours in coach. The driver who finally arrived, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, helped hoist the bag into the trunk without comment about my missing arm. I slid into the back seat, pressed my forehead to the cool window, and closed my eyes. The ride was uneventful, though I noticed every bump in the road like it jarred straight into my bones. My prosthetic ached against its socket, and I adjusted it constantly. By the time we reached my street, twilight had stretched across the neighborhood. Houses glowed with the warm invitation of porch lights. Families gathered in living rooms, laughter spilling out into the evening. It smelled faintly of charcoal and grilled meat barbecues, just like my parents had mentioned. I wondered if one of them belonged to them. Inside my own house, the air was stale and cold. I had asked my parents to adjust the thermostat before my arrival. Clearly, they had forgotten. Mail spilled from the basket by the door, a stack of unopened envelopes I'd asked my brother to handle. The refrigerator hummed emptily, save for condiments with expiration dates long past. I dropped onto the couch, fully dressed coat still zipped against the chill. The silence pressed in heavier than body armor, and my eyelids finally sank. I woke hours later to the sound of my own breath rasping in the darkness. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred at the edges. When I tried to sit up, the room tilted, and I collapsed back against the cushions. The beeping started faintly, then grew louder, the carbon monoxide detector flashing red across the room. My phone lay just out of reach on the coffee table. My right hand stretched fingers brushing air. Too far. The last thought I remember was oddly calm. At least I told them, fine. Then blackness swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes again, fluorescent light burned overhead and a nurse adjusted the IV in my arm. The steady beep of a heart monitor anchored me back to consciousness. My throat was dry, my head pounding, but my eyes went straight to the phone on the tray beside me. 28 missed calls. From Troy, from Mom, from Dad. All time-stamped in the hours after I collapsed alone. I let the phone screen dim and turned my head away. For once, they would not get a reply. Long before Afghanistan, before the prosthetic strap cut into my shoulder, before the headlines, there were the small moments that shaped me, the quiet, sharp lessons in what family meant, or didn't mean. I grew up in a 2-story house on the east side of Portland. Pale green shutters that always needed repainting, a maple tree in the front yard that dumped helicopters all over the driveway. Inside life revolved around my brother Troy. He was 3 years older, a star pitcher on the high school baseball team, a golden boy with a ready smile, and just enough charm to keep my parents orbiting his every need. I was the quiet one, the studious one. I played clarinet in band, pulled straight A's, loved reading novels under the covers with a flashlight. If you asked my parents, though, I was the one who never needed much. They said it like a compliment, but I heard it for what it was, an excuse. One memory clings harder than the rest. I was 8, clambering up the maple tree out front when the branch cracked under my weight. I hit the ground with a sickening snap. My arm dangled at an odd angle, white-hot pain shooting up to my shoulder. My parents rushed me to the ER, but after the X-ray confirmed a fracture, they left me with a neighbor while they drove Troy to his championship game. "He can't miss this," my mother said, brushing hair out of my sweaty face. "The whole team is counting on him." I told myself it didn't matter. I was fine. Even then, I was learning the word that would become a shield: fine. By high school, the pattern was etched deep. Troy got new cleats every season, baseball camps across the state. I worked a part-time job at the library to cover my own clothes, my own extras. The night I was awarded a statewide essay prize, my parents clapped politely, then ducked out early. Troy had an early morning practice. I remember folding the certificate into my backpack, cheeks burning, wondering why I kept expecting more. College was the first time I glimpsed freedom. I earned a scholarship, my ticket out. My father's first question wasn't congratulations. It was, "This won't cost us anything." Right, Troy's summer camps are expensive. I smiled and nodded. No problem. I was used to it. Still, I kept thinking if I achieved enough, if I pushed far enough, maybe they'd see me. Maybe pride would finally light their eyes. When recruiters came to campus, crisp uniforms gleaming under fluorescent gym lights, I felt something stir. Service. Honor. The chance to be part of something bigger than myself. Maybe they'd be proud of me for wearing the flag. Basic training was grueling miles run, until lungs burned push-ups, until arms shook the drill sergeant's voice, barking until it rang in my dreams. But it also felt strangely like belonging. My fellow recruits didn't care about Troy's curveball or my parents' absences. They cared if I could haul my pack, keep my head, cover their flank. In that desert sweat, I felt worth in a way I never had at home. Deployment came fast. Afghanistan was dust and heat sand grinding into every seam of our gear. The mountains looked endless, jagged teeth against an unforgiving sky. We ate MREs that tasted faintly of cardboard, laughed at bad jokes under the stars, and counted down the days until R&R. Mail from home was sporadic. When it came, Troy's notes were perfunctory. "Hope you're good." "Baseball's great." My parents were shorter still. "Stay safe. Love, Mom and Dad." Still, I clutched those scraps of paper like lifelines. I taped one above my bunk. "Proud of you." Just 3 words written in my mother's tidy script. For weeks, I let myself believe it. But in quieter moments under the Afghan sky, I knew the truth. They were proud when it was easy, when it was convenient, when it didn't cost them anything. The hard parts, the messy parts. Those were always mine to shoulder alone. I didn't join the military for revenge, though maybe part of me wanted to prove something. To show them I could be strong, valuable, worth notice. I carried that hope through firefights and long convoys, through the loneliness that seeped in when the laughter died down. And then one day, that hope was ripped away with my left arm. The explosion wasn't cinematic. It was sudden, brutal, a deafening roar followed by dust and silence. Pain carved me open, white and searing, then nothing at all. When I woke in the field hospital, my arm gone from the elbow down, I stared at the bandages and thought of that maple tree fall. My body broken again, my parents nowhere near. Letters arrived, shorter, brisker. We're glad you're alive. Get well soon. Troy sent a photo of his new car. I told myself it didn't matter. I was fine. But in the pit of my chest, the question echoed if this didn't earn their presence. What would? So I clung to the idea of coming home, of stepping off the plane and seeing them waiting, even if awkwardly, of feeling arms around me, hearing we're proud. That picture played in my head as they wheeled me onto transport, as I learned to button shirts one-handed, as I trained with the prosthetic that rubbed my skin raw. And yet, when the moment finally came, the screen lit only with excuses. A barbecue, a busy schedule, an Uber. I typed fine, the word I'd been training to say my entire life. The Portland terminal buzzed like a hive, voices blending into a low roar, punctuated by the occasional sharp call over the loudspeakers. I stood near the sliding door suitcase handle, clutched in my one good hand, trying to steady the tremor in my legs. 30 hours of travel pressed into my bones. My body felt like a machine on the edge of shutdown, every system flashing red. The prosthetic itched under its strap, the pressure sore on my shoulder, screaming each time I shifted. My mouth was parched, tongue thick as leather. I had downed the tiny water bottles offered on the flights, but nothing could quench the thirst that came from exhaustion and pain. Around me, families reunited in bursts of laughter and hugs. Little kids barreled into grandparents' arms. Couples kissed shamelessly in baggage claim. And me, I stood alone, the word fine, buzzing like a wasp in my head. My Uber pinged 5 minutes away. I pulled the phone closer, reading the driver's name, Paul Gray, Honda Civic. The letters blurred my vision, swimming. I tried to focus on the moving crowd instead, grounding myself in details, the smell of cinnamon rolls from a kiosk, the squeak of sneakers on tile, the shriek of a child refusing to leave the toy shop. When Paul pulled up, he gave me a nod, nothing more. I managed a smile that felt glued onto my face. He lifted the suitcase without comment, his arms flexing with an ease that made me ache. I slid into the backseat leather, sticking to my jacket. The ride was quiet, mercifully so. I stared out the window at the fading daylight. Portland looked both familiar and strange. Bridges arched gracefully across the river headlights, streaking over them like ribbons of light. The air outside was crisp, autumn-sharp leaves already painting the sidewalks red and gold. It should have felt like homecoming. Instead, each passing block hammered in the reminder I was arriving to silence. When Paul pulled up to my street, I thanked him softly, fumbling awkwardly with my wallet. He waved off my apology for taking too long. "Take care of yourself," he said almost absent-mindedly. The words landed heavier than he knew. The house stood waiting, porch light off, curtains drawn. Inside, the air smelled faintly sour, like a place closed too long. I set my suitcase down, the wheels thumping against the hardwood. My shoulders sagged with the weight of everything, of absence, of neglect, of hope that had once been alive. I opened the fridge out of habit. Empty shelves save for condiments lined like forgotten soldiers, mustard with crusted cap, a jar of pickles floating in cloudy brine, a milk carton 2 weeks expired. I shut it quickly, the rubber seal hissing like a sigh. The house was cold. I rubbed my hands together, realizing I was still wearing the coat I'd zipped up hours earlier. I pulled out my phone again, checked the group chat. Nothing since my last fine. The screen mocked me with its blankness. I dropped onto the couch. My body sank deep, like the cushions wanted to swallow me whole. I meant only to close my eyes for a minute. Just a minute. When I opened them again, darkness filled the room. My head pounded with a vicious throb vision, stuttering like an old film reel. The air felt heavier, thicker, like breathing through wool. I tried to sit up, but the room tilted violently. My stomach lurched, bile rising. That's when I heard it, the faint, insistent beep. At first, I thought it was in my head. Then my eyes found it, the carbon monoxide detector flashing red across the room, its alarm muffled but urgent. Panic prickled. My phone sat on the coffee table, just out of reach. I reached forward, fingertips grazing air. My body refused to obey, every limb sluggish and heavy. I collapsed back onto the couch chest, heaving eyes wide. The last thing I saw was the phone lighting up, one new notification glowing against the dark. I thought of the word I'd typed earlier. Fine. I almost laughed. Then blackness took me. When I came to, it was under fluorescent light, the sterile smell of antiseptic flooding my nostrils. Voices echoed faintly, clipped and urgent. My throat was dry, my body tethered to machines by cords and tubes. "Easy, you're in the hospital," a nurse said, adjusting the IV taped to my arm. Her voice was calm, practiced. I blinked, disoriented. My eyes landed on the tray beside me. My phone. The screen lit as if on cue. 28 missed calls. Troy, Mom, Dad. Over and over. Desperate attempts after silence. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't even unlock it. I let the screen dim and turned my face to the ceiling tiles, their grid pattern sharp against my blurred eyes. They wanted me now. But when I needed them at baggage claim, at the curb, in the cold silence of my house, there had only been 3 words: grab an Uber. Lying in that hospital bed with monitors tracing my heartbeat in neat green lines, I couldn't stop my mind from reaching backward. The present pain was unbearable, but it was the old wounds that began to pulse again, reminding me how familiar this pattern really was. The missed calls piling on my phone felt almost absurd. Why the urgency now? Why the panic after a lifetime of absence? The truth was simple. They weren't panicked for me. They were panicked for themselves, for the way it might look. I thought of the maple tree again. 8 years old, arm broken, left with a neighbor, while Troy's baseball team took precedence. The neighbor had been kind, gave me ginger ale, helped me prop my arm with pillows. But the absence of my parents seared deeper than the fracture. I remember the way the fluorescent ER light buzzed, the way the doctor's voice softened when he asked, "Are your parents coming back soon?" And how I smiled weakly and said, "They'll be here after the game." I knew even then it was a lie. That wasn't the only time. High school graduation should have been a milestone. I had fought tooth and nail for my place at the podium valedictorian, every word of my speech carefully written the night before. They showed up, yes, but stood in the back. My father kept glancing at his watch. The moment the diploma was in my hand, they whisked Troy to a tournament across town. No dinner out, no photo, just a rushed hug, a distracted good job, and exhaust fumes as they drove away. By the time college came, I thought I'd stopped hoping. My scholarship letter should have been framed. Instead, Dad only asked if it would cost them anything. Troy was heading to a private university, his tuition covered by their sacrifices. Mine, I worked in the dining hall, cleaned classrooms in the evenings, juggled shifts between exams. My parents sent care packages to Troy, boxes filled with snacks gear, handwritten notes. To me, a single envelope with $20 and a post-it, make it last. And then there was my wedding day. I thought, maybe they'd rise to the occasion. I wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant. I wanted them to see me happy, whole, starting my own life. But Mom spent half the reception fussing over Troy's new girlfriend, who wore white of all things, and Dad spent the other half complaining about the cost of the venue. Troy arrived late, unapologetic, all eyes on him as usual. When James squeezed my hand and whispered, "Focus on us," I tried, but the sting lingered. Every big moment of my life had carried that same aftertaste. I was the afterthought, the shadow child, the one who learned to say it's fine even when it wasn't, because demanding more never worked. The military became my escape hatch. The day I shipped out, I half expected at least a small display, balloons, a cake, something. Instead, Mom packed a cooler for Troy's baseball road trip. Dad checked the tire pressure on his car, and Troy himself gave me a half-hearted salute. "Don't do anything crazy," he joked. I boarded the plane with a duffel bag and a hollow in my chest. In Afghanistan, surrounded by dust and danger, I found something I'd never had at home: people who noticed when I was missing. Squad mates who counted on me, who cared if I was hurting. We joked over bad instant coffee, cursed the sandstorms that rattled our tents, watched each other's backs on patrol. They became family in ways blood never had. But when the blast tore through my convoy and I woke up staring at a stump where my arm should be, I still called home. I wanted desperately for their voices to anchor me. Mom answered, voice flat. "We're glad you're alive," she said quickly, "but you really should have thought harder about insurance." Dad asked if the Army would still cover my salary. Troy texted later, "That sucks. Hey, guess what? I got a new car." Even then, I typed back, "Fine." Now, staring at the hospital ceiling, I realized how deep that training ran. Saying I was fine was muscle memory. It had protected me for years. It was easier than explaining the hollow ache of disappointment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been trained to fight wars, to face explosions, to rebuild my life from shrapnel and loss. But the deepest scars weren't from Afghanistan. They were from living in a family where I had always been second place, always the backup plan. The 28 missed calls. They weren't for me. They were for the image of me, for the story they suddenly realized might be told without their input. And they were right to be afraid, because for once, I wasn't going to protect them with silence. The first journalist I ever spoke to came to me by accident. His name was Michael Chen, a local reporter doing a segment on veterans' healthcare. He wasn't looking for me. He was following a paramedic at Portland General, shadowing a shift for background. But he overheard one of them in the break room, voice low, shaking his head. She texted her family for a ride home. You know what they said? Grab an Uber. And then she collapsed alone. I've seen a lot, but man. Michael's ears perked up. He asked a few questions. Later, he came to my room. Press badge tucked into his jacket. "Ma'am?" He began, careful, respectful. "I heard a little about what happened. Would you be willing to talk?" At first, I wanted to say no, to retreat, to guard my story the way I always had. But then I thought of those 28 missed calls, the sudden desperation after years of absence. I thought of how my silence had always shielded them. And for the first time, I felt the urge to tell it out loud, not to protect, but to be heard. So I spoke, not in anger, but in detail. I described the 30 sleepless hours of travel, the prosthetic strap digging into my shoulder, the weight of the suitcase I could barely manage. I repeated the texts word for word. "Busy. Just grab an Uber. We've got a BBQ, figure it out." Michael's eyes widened, his pen scribbling furiously. He didn't need embellishment. The words were damning on their own. The story aired on the 10 o'clock news the next evening. Veteran returns from Afghanistan. Left alone at airport. My name was there. My face blurred in B-roll as I was wheeled through hospital corridors. The anchor's voice carried a mix of shock and compassion. After serving overseas and losing her left arm in combat, she returned to Portland last week. When she asked her family for a ride, their replies were dismissive. Hours later, she collapsed from exhaustion and carbon monoxide exposure in her home. The clip cut to the paramedic, eyes somber. Her phone was still open to the group chat when we found her. It broke my heart. Nobody should come home to that. By morning, the story had gone viral. Community Facebook groups shared screenshots, hashtags began to trend. Try Uber, out no family, vets deserve better. My inbox flooded with messages from strangers, veterans who knew the sting of coming home, unseen widows who whispered their own stories of neglect, ordinary people offering meals, blankets, even a spare room if I needed it. Meanwhile, my family went into overdrive. Troy called 7 times in an hour, leaving voicemails that started frantic and ended furious. "You made us look like monsters. It was just a misunderstanding. You should have told them the full story." Mom's messages came next, a string of defensive explanations. The BBQ was a commitment we couldn't cancel. You know your father's back was hurting that day. We thought you'd want some independence after everything. Dad's voice was quieter. A single voicemail. This has gotten out of hand. Call us back so we can figure out how to fix this. Fix this. That was always their angle. Not support, not apology. Damage control. But the genie was out of the bottle now. The community had seen the raw truth. Businesses reached out. A plumbing company offered to repair my flooded pipes for free. A local hotel chain extended a complimentary stay until my house was safe. A grief support group left a voicemail inviting me to their next meeting. One morning, a florist's delivery arrived at my hospital door, a massive arrangement of red, white, and blue blooms. The card read, "From a grateful neighbor you've never met. Welcome home." I stared at the flowers, throat tight. It was more care than I had felt from my own blood in years. The hospital staff whispered about the story in hallways, some stopping in just to squeeze my hand. One nurse, eyes fierce, muttered, "They don't deserve you." I didn't answer, but the warmth of her words seeped deep. That night, as the news replayed with updates, I imagined my family watching, their phones lighting up with messages from friends, co-workers, neighbors, all asking the same question. How could you? The missed calls kept coming. 28, 32, 35. But I let them pile up. I wasn't going to shield them this time. I wasn't going to absorb the blame so they could stay untarnished. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been abandoned by those who should have loved them first. And it was only the beginning. They showed up 2 days later. Not quietly, not humbly, but in a rush of perfume and cologne and the sound of dress shoes clicking across the hospital linoleum. My mother led the charge, her voice pitched higher than usual, the way it always was when she wanted people nearby to overhear. "Sweetheart, we came as soon as we could," she said, sweeping into my room with a bouquet of grocery store flowers, their plastic wraps still crinkling. Troy followed, shoulders squared, like he was walking into court, not a hospital room. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and I caught a glimpse of a Twitter notification. He'd been reading the comments. I knew that tight-pinched look on his face, less guilt, more fury that people were talking. Dad lingered at the door, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes darting everywhere but me. For a moment, none of us spoke. The monitors filled the silent, steady beeps marking my pulse, a soft hiss from the oxygen line. Finally, Troy broke it. "This is getting blown way out of proportion." I raised an eyebrow. My voice was soft even. "Is it?" He gestured sharply as if swatting a fly. "You didn't tell them the whole story. We didn't know how tired you were. You made it sound like we abandoned you." I cut in the words, slipping out before I could stop them. "Because you did." Mom gasped, clutching her pearls like a scene from an old movie. "Now that's unfair. You know we had plans that evening. You can't expect us to cancel every commitment at the last minute. Families have responsibilities." "Families do," I said quietly, "but I'm not sure ours ever worked that way." The air stiffened, tension vibrating like a live wire. A nurse stepped in, then Jessica, the one who had adjusted my IV the night before with such gentle hands. She checked the monitor, her eyes flicking between us. She didn't say anything, but her presence grounded me. I turned back to my family. "Do you want me to list them? Because I can." Mom shook her head sharply. "Amelia, don't." But I did. When I broke my arm falling out of the maple tree, you left me with the neighbor to get Troy to his game. When I won the statewide essay prize, you left before my name was even called. At my college graduation, Dad, you asked if it was going to cost you money. At my wedding, Mom, you spent the whole day fussing over Troy's girlfriend instead of me. And when I lost my arm I lifted the stump raw and bandaged, you asked if the Army would still pay me. Troy shifted uncomfortably, jaw clenched. "That's ancient history. You're dredging up stuff that doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me," I said. My voice didn't rise, but the steadiness carried its own weight. "And it mattered when you told me to get an Uber after 30 sleepless hours in a war zone. It mattered when you chose a barbecue over showing up for me. You keep saying it's a misunderstanding. But what I understand is that this is a pattern, a lifetime of patterns. Dad finally spoke, his voice low. We didn't know how serious things were. I looked at him steadily. Did you ask? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Silence. Jessica's hand brushed my chart as she spoke up, breaking the standoff. Amelia, remember what we talked about. The choice is yours. You don't have to decide based on anyone else's image. Mom bristled. Excuse me, but this is our daughter. We'll take her home when she's discharged. Jessica's eyes stayed on mine, calm and steady. That's not how this works. She decides where she goes, who she trusts. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across my mother's face. Real fear, not for me, but for the collapse of the facade she had worked so hard to polish. I'm not going home with you, I said. The words landed heavy final. Mom's lips parted, outrage trembling there. Troy swore under his breath. Dad stared at the floor tiles. I continued. The community has shown up more in 3 days than you have in 30 years. Strangers brought flowers. A neighbor offered me meals. A support group called to invite me. Do you understand what that means? They see me. You never did. Mom slammed the flowers down on the tray table, the plastic rattling. This is ridiculous. You're humiliating us. I shook my head. No, Mom. You did that yourselves. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor tracking my heart. Finally, Troy muttered, "We'll talk later," and stormed out. Mom followed, heels clacking like gunshots in the hallway. Dad lingered for a heartbeat longer, eyes flicking to mine. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything. But in the end, he only sighed, shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Jessica glanced at me, her gaze full of quiet strength. That took courage, she said softly. I leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over me. For once, though, it wasn't the exhaustion of being ignored. It was the exhaustion of finally speaking the truth. And it was the first step towards something new. Discharge day came sooner than I expected. The paperwork was thick, the instructions for wound care and concussion monitoring overwhelming. But what surprised me most wasn't the process. It was who showed up. Not my family. Instead, it was Diane, the neighbor from across the street. She knocked softly on my hospital door, carrying a tote bag full of snacks, hand lotion, and magazines. I saw the story she said, her eyes brimming. No one should go through that alone. If you need rides, groceries, or just someone to sit with, I'm here. I swallowed hard, unable to answer at first. Diane had lived across from my parents for years. We'd exchanged polite hellos, maybe borrowed sugar once or twice. Yet here she was with more compassion than the people who raised me. The hospital arranged for me to stay in a local hotel, donated by a chain that had seen the news coverage. When I arrived, the manager himself met me in the lobby, pressing a key card into my hand. Stay as long as you need. You've already paid more than enough for this country. The suite was warm with fresh sheets that smelled of lavender and a refrigerator stocked with simple, nourishing food. I sat on the bed, letting the comfort wrap around me, and realized this was the first time since James died, since Afghanistan, that I felt cared for. Not tolerated, not brushed aside, truly cared for. In the weeks that followed, the community became my lifeline. A local plumbing company repaired the burst pipes in my house at no charge. A restoration service not only fixed the water damage, but installed a new thermostat to prevent future freezes. Veterans groups reached out, inviting me to meetings where I met other women who knew the struggle of coming home to silence. I began physical therapy at the VA, learning to maneuver with one arm strapping on the prosthetic with less fumbling. My therapist, a wiry man named Carl, had a way of making the grueling sessions feel like victories. "You're not broken," he told me once, catching my eyes in the mirror. "You're adapting. That strength most people never understand." For the first time, I believed him. At home, Diane brought over casseroles, and her husband raked my leaves without being asked. A retired teacher down the block sat with me on hard days, just listening as I rambled about James, about Afghanistan, about everything I'd bottled up. These people weren't obligated by blood. They showed up because they cared. That difference was staggering. My family's presence when it came was measured and shallow. A generic thinking of you card from mom and dad. A clipped voicemail from Troy, mostly complaints about his co-workers, teasing him after seeing the news. None of them ever mentioned the hospital confrontation. None of them apologized. I stopped waiting for it. Instead, I poured myself into something new. With the help of the Veteran Support Network, I created a local fund for female veterans returning home, covering emergency expenses, ride services, even small stipends for groceries or utilities. I named it after two of my squad mates who never made it home. Their faces stayed with me, their laughter echoing in my memory, and I wanted their names tied to something that healed. At the fund's first community meeting, we gathered in a VFW hall. Rows of folding chairs filled with strangers, now friends who had rallied for me when my own family hadn't. I stood at the front sleeve pinned neatly where my arm used to be and spoke. This isn't about pity, I told them. It's about presence, about showing up. Strangers have shown up for me more in the past few months than my family has in my whole life. That's the lesson I carry now. Family isn't always blood. Family is who shows up when it matters. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was steady, warm. It felt like a circle of arms around me, the kind I'd stopped hoping for from my parents long ago. 6 months later, my garden was alive again. The soil smelled rich, the tomatoes climbing tall with sturdy cages around them. James used to joke my tomatoes could win ribbons at the state fair. As I clipped the first ripe one juice sweet on my fingers, I whispered his name into the breeze. The house was whole again, pipes repaired walls, fresh a new sense of safety humming through its bones. More importantly, I was whole again, or at least on my way. Not because of my family's sudden change of heart, they never did change, but because I stopped expecting water from a dry well. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, phone buzzing softly with messages from the support group. Words of encouragement, check-ins, simple reminders that I wasn't alone. I scrolled past my family's unread texts, the ones that still tried to explain excuse or cajole. And then I let the phone rest on the arm of the chair. The truth was clear. My revenge hadn't been dramatic. It wasn't shouting or cutting them off with venom. It was choosing to live well, to surround myself with people who gave freely without condition. It was boundaries. It was peace. And it was mine. When I tell this story, now I think back to that night in the hospital. The phone glowing with 28 missed calls, the desperation finally flowing in from the people who had ignored me when it mattered. I didn't answer then. I don't regret it. Because for the first time, I realized I didn't need their voices to steady me. I had my own. And now I have yours. If you've ever felt abandoned, when you needed someone most, I hope you hear this clearly. You are not alone. Family can be chosen. Support can come from unexpected places. Your worth isn't measured by whether those closest to you recognize it. It's measured by how fiercely you continue forward. I'd love to hear your stories. Have strangers ever shown up for you when family didn't share it in the comments? And if this journey resonated, consider subscribing not just for me, but for the reminder that healing is possible even after the deepest scars. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire. It's simply living better, louder, and freer than anyone expected you to. And that, my friends, is enough.